So in the beginning of this little video, the comment was ignore her jaw. No. Do not ignore her jaw. That's how she's getting like that. She's emphasizing certain pitches by changing her jaw really fast. It's actually a technique a lot of people have used because the sound of auto-tune is so popular with all those things being so exact. So you can actually like pop your jaw in and out. I can't do very well. I have a very tense jaw, but I see it a lot. You know, people like double joint pop their jaw to give a little bit emphasis, a little bit of rhythm emphasis. And you can hear that here, and it's not a bad thing. It's actually a really intricate, cool thing. All right. Anyway. You hear how that changes the sound? That's really intentional. Do not sleep on this technique. It's really, really clever. It changes the sound, and she does it on purpose. Oh, man. So again, this jaw thing is super clever. Right? Like that little jaw motion does a lot to give the notes life and emphasis. If you don't do things in a run, it just sounds like a bunch of notes, and then you're basically doing a scale. If you want to make music, you have to recognize that scales happen in meter. What is meter? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Different beats have different emphasis, depending on what meter you're in. So she is giving life to these notes. Right? Cool. To a guitar player long enough, say for example Buckethead, I do love me some metal, he definitely has his go-to riff. Same with Slash, same with anybody. And so if you want to do riffing and solos, you can develop a lot of comfort with certain patterns. And this pattern that we're going to hear here is something Ariana Grande uses a lot. Right? So she does this scalular pattern that she does a lot, and then she gets off of it, she gets on it, and she'll do this sort of like belting thing that she loves to do where she goes, right? Boom. So a good trick to learn runs definitely is to pick up these scalular patterns. One thing you can do is you can go to these videos and just slow them down tremendously, right? And listen to the notes right here. It's hard to bear a little bit, you know, it's all weird sound, but it's a great way to slow things down and really understand each and every note. You know, you can go and do scales, but I think it's actually a lot more beneficial to go and see what your favorite artists are doing on their runs and try to copy the musical patterns that they're using. If you just do scales, you'll run into the sort of problem that I said before where everything's not meter, everything's kind of just a bunch of notes. Whereas if you're copying music, you're going to build that intuition, and that's going to be really beneficial. This super awesome belting stuff that she does. Let's take a listen. Duh. That's a pattern she uses a lot, right? And so what's cool here is how she manages the breath. Again, when you're belting, the most important part of belting is managing your breath. So let's hear how she does that. So you can see this inhale that happens here, but watch how her torso kind of collapses a little bit here. And I'll point out why she's doing that. So when you go for a belt, one of the tricks you can do to make sure that you don't hurt yourself and don't bring too much air to the equation is you can exhale. And you can do this on unvoiced consonants, or you can kind of take a break, exhale, and then go into the phrase like she does here. That was an exhale, not an inhale. Pretty clever, right? That sounds pretty much exactly like Christina Aguilera. It's interesting because I would have assumed that she's getting that tone by bringing her tongue back, but you can see that the tongue is very forward. That makes things a lot easier. It's more efficient. There are people who sing with their tongue back, but it is more efficient to put the tongue forward. So the only thing I can think of here that gives her that dark tone that's more akin to Christina Aguilera than her, is going to be the vowel choice. So instead of ah, she's going ah, right? Little ah instead of an ah. And that growl is also delicious. Let's hear that again. So what she's doing here, and this is something that is really something when you do growls, this is something you should go for. She's going from the lower part of the voice, like, lie to me, right? Do that grind and then get up on the pitch. It's a lot safer and less exhausting. So no matter what you do, no matter how clean your technique, a vocal fry, which looks like this in your folds, plop, 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 plop. They're just hitting together, and it's not... it's exhausting a little bit. It's always a little tiring no matter how well you do it. But if you do it in the low, what's going to happen is that your vocal folds are hitting together less times in a second, because when you're lower, the way that pitch is made is that the vocal folds oscillate, right? So if you're on A4, your vocal folds are oscillating at 440 times a second. Right? And so when you do these growls, it's really a good idea to do them in the low, because you can always do other things around that, right? Let's see. Nope. See how she digs up into the pitch? That's smart. Her jaw again, and we also get a good look at these patterns that keep coming up in her runs. You can see that there are consistent patterns, right? And I want to be very clear. This is not a bad thing. There's something called the lick in jazz, which is kind of a meme. You hear it everywhere. And then there's also, Charlie Parker and a lot of other jazz musicians have these patterns that make those patterns and scales and runs idiomatic of that person, right? It's a form of self-expression. What patterns do you like? What licks do you use, right? And so even though she's using the same patterns, what she's doing vocally is different every single time. So we could like slow down and pretty much pick this apart, and there's a lot here. So no, right? Listen to the vowels here. We're gonna do it really piece by piece. So that right? So she's shaping the vowels as she descends. And again, I just want to point out that jaw thing. Listen to how the sound changes when that jaw thing happens. Right? It really gives a sort of a punch to the sound. And it's really, really clever because it, again, allows you to just shape the phrase in a way that you wouldn't really have access to other than just using vowels, which she's also using. So whenever people talk about like the hard things to do, the advanced things to do in singing, what it really is just, it's the fundamentals crisscrossing, right? Scale patterns, vowels, using your jaw in different ways, understanding belt, right? All of these components can be practiced and should be practiced individually. But where things get interesting is when they mix and match all of these little ingredients. So the fundamentals are really, really, really important. And then what you should do is you should play with all those different elements so that they come together. And that's why she can do all of these different things, right? She can play with them. She can break them down into their smallest bits. It's almost like she's really good or something. That's hard. Let's talk about why. So in a lot of the runs that we have seen so far, she's going from usually a belt into like a very light neutral larynx position where she just kind of does the things. And like I said before, the folds have to be really thin generally when you go for a run, because then they move quicker, right? It'd be like the difference between moving your fingers, moving your arm, right? The finger's going to move faster. But this is a tricky one because she's belting the whole way through. And you can see that these are slower than her ordinary runs where she's not belting, but this kind of moving around is really tricky. When you belt, you tilt this cricoid cartilage and your folds get super fat, super fat. So to be able to move really quickly here, you have to have precise, incredible breath. She's also tilting her head back, which again helps with the whole tilt thing. There's two different kinds of tilt, and right now we're almost exclusively talking about the belting tilt, the cricoid cartilage tilt. So, and tilting happens on a continuum. You don't just boop, boop. It's not an off switch, or it's not an on and off switch. It's a dimmer light, right? And so you can hear how the tilt is coming kind of up and down and up and down in order to navigate when she wants power versus when she wants the ability to move a little bit faster. Very intricate stuff here. I want you to see if you can hear when that tilt goes a little bit back up and then goes down again. You hear when that power kicks in? And then it's a little bit less tilted. So she's navigating this whole tilt thing as she's doing the run. Very, very tricky stuff. It makes it idiomatic to Ariana Grande, but let's just take a moment to appreciate how bizonkers high this is. That's nuts. That's completely insane. And again, it has to do with primarily breath control, but man, it's so... High notes take so little air, and when you're going this high, it's not enough to have very little air from the inhale and even exhale before you go to the note. Those are great tricks. But when you go this high, you actually need to suspend your rib cage, right? Your intercostal muscles will expand a little bit. It's not like you don't hold it around and get tight. It's just a little bit, right? And what that does is it expands the lungs a little bit more. So any part of the torso is going to affect the lungs because the lungs they don't have any structure of their own. They're kind of just glued to your torso. And a lot of people talk about the diaphragm, and yes, the diaphragm contracts and then your lungs expand, but you don't have control of your diaphragm. Like, where's your diaphragm? Do you feel your diaphragm? No, it's impossible. It doesn't have nerve endings. But we do have other things that we can control, like the ribs. And so because the structure of the lungs is entirely reliant on the torso and on what it's connected to, by using your intercostal muscles to expand your rib cage a little bit, you make it so that there's even less air. And that is how you kind of have to get into these insane high notes. Without that, it's just so difficult and probably dangerous. And the cat ears are very important as well. And this gets more into the breath control sort of elements of these things. You see how quick that inhale was? Because it's a shallow inhale, which again is on purpose. That is very short inhale. And you can tell whenever you make that sound, there's usually a little bit of, it's usually there might be tension in the stomach or whatever, or you're making a shallow inhale. And again, just to beat a dead horse, whenever you belt, or anytime you go high, even if you're singing opera, you don't want a lot of air. The other element to belting that's important is having a higher larynx. And so when you take a short breath like that, your larynx does go up, right? Versus if you take a big, full breath, the larynx goes down way more. Yeah. Really cool and all that, but you can tire your voice out very quickly if you're just practicing high notes, if you're just practicing belts. And, musicianship and navigating these things is a big part of the equation. So let's watch how she practices this stuff. It's really interesting. She's basically in falsetto. And this is something I think a lot of newer singers get wrong, because a lot of newer singers don't have the ability to sing powerful high notes. They come to resent falsetto, which you shouldn't resent it. It's a tool, and particularly useful when you're doing what's called marking. And marking is how singers will rehearse so that they don't tire out their voice, right? Exactly. Very, very smart way to practice. Definitely how you should be practicing. You can't go for high notes belting all the time. That's not a practice session. That's an abuse session. That you can tilt the thyroid cartilage. Listen to how the vibrato kicks in. That's how you know that that thyroid tilt is there. Right? On the tail end of that. And what's cool about the thyroid cartilage is that it gives you a darker, more rich sound, which is why opera singers really, really kind of find it essential to tilt that whole thing throughout the entire range. So if I go, right, I can really darken the sound with that thyroid tilt. Now, she's not only using the thyroid tilt, you can use the cricoid tilt, the belting tilt, and the thyroid tilt at the same time. And you can do, like, it's this, like, this could be this dance of one's tilting, one's going, one's tilting, they're both tilting, right? And that is what's happening here. She's just going throat gymnastics on us. Right? The belt into the vibrato, into the warm tone. I mean, she's just doing gymnastics on us. Another element of doing a lot of runs, particularly if you're in a live setting where you don't have a lot of control over the audio, you have to do things with the mic. You need mic technique, right? And what you don't want to clip. What clipping is when you go so loud that there's this distortion, and it's not pleasant to hear, and it really muddies up and sounds ugly. Some people like that clipping sound, like a Scarlord and other people who are going for that abrasive, over-the-top sound. But generally, when you want to be, understood with what you're doing musically, you don't want that. So let's look at how she navigates that using mic technique. Right? Totally far away. And the reason why this is that you cannot have a quiet belt. There is no such thing, period, the end. It doesn't work that way. If you want quiet, falsetto, thyroid tilting can be done. You just have to be very careful with what you're doing with your vowels and how much you're tilting, right? But belt does not happen in a quiet way. And so she's adjusting for it accordingly. She's really smart. And when she gets into her low, she's basically eating that microphone, which does two things. One is the proximity effect. If I go closer, all of a sudden, I have a deeper AM radio voice, right? And so that's one of the things that proximity does, is that gives you that lower boost. But of course, the closer the mic, the louder, right? So she goes from super, super high with the mic very far away into her low where her mic is very close to her face. And again, that's understanding the journey, the musical journey of this run and using mic technique accordingly, making the runs musically matter. But I don't think we've touched on making the runs something that can bring out the words of the song. And this next clip, I think, does that really well. You can hear how dramatic this is. I want you to stay, maybe is the words. Please correct me in the comments. I'm not very good with knowing, understanding the words unless I sit down with them. But you can hear how it gives more to it. This like crying thing that she's doing, it really opens up the throat. When you have, it's funny, in opera they call it the Italian sob, which, whatever. But really all it is a lowered larynx, and then your soft palate's super lifted, and It's and then she brings in that thyroid tilt right at the end. So that, again, this going through belting, tilt, and then thyroid tilt, and then you know, using it to emphasize the words, which is always going to be more important, I think, than the musical phrasing, is to give the words life. That's a very, very heartfelt run that's been sung with a lot of conviction. So usually when we go up, we do use these tilts, but you don't have to necessarily. I mean, there's a limit to how high you can go without them. But the way she gets her pitch up here without having this extra power that does come from the tilts is she's continuously raising her larynx and using less air. She goes right into falsetto. Ooh, by the way, is a great vowel to train your falsetto. It tends to, for some reason, get people into their falsetto. So I think that's really clever. Not only, you don't have to be epic and big all the time. You want to get sensitive sometimes. And I think it's really important to understand how to ascend. You know, again, there's a limit to how far you can ascend without using either of the tilts, but you can go decently high and it sounds really fragile and sensitive. I just think that's really, really intelligent rerun. Listen to this. So it's very much a very, very light mix. It's very close to being falsetto. Again, mixing and falsetto are not great terms. They're not very descriptive. Falsetto, pure falsetto, boom, the folds are flipped open. But mix has this entire range of motion. As long as there's some connection, there can be all of this space in between the vocal folds to get us higher. Basically, we're adding more falsetto, right? There's a little bit of separation, and that can give us really cool tones. We don't want to, as singers, search for one sound. We want to have a toolbox, and this is an interesting demonstration of that because all of the runs beforehand were kind of a little bit more big, a little bit more epic, and so this is a great example of using more of a gentle approach. And I love that way that she lands on the bottom there to give it a little bit of oomph.